Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 5729. The bill was circulated in advance and printed copies are available. The clerk shall designate the bill.
H.R. 5729, offered by Mr. Pfluger, to prohibit the use of federal funds to establish a Homeland Intelligence Experts Group, and for other purposes.
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with and it's considered read and open to amendment at any point. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of the substitute. The clerk will report the amendment in the nature of the substitute.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 5729, offered by Mr. Pfluger.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with and the amendment in the nature of the substitute should be considered base text for the purpose of the further amendment. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes on his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this bill that would prohibit the use of federal funds to establish a Homeland Intelligence Experts Group, or any similar group for that matter. In September of last year, DHS established a Homeland Intelligence Expert Group. This group was allegedly made up of members to advise the Office of Intelligence and Analysis and assist with decision-making and provide outside perspectives on intelligence and counterterrorism. Two of the so-called experts in this group are John Brennan and James Clapper, who both signed a discredited public statement on October 19, 2020, that incorrectly implied reports of Hunter Biden's political influence peddling were the product of Russian disinformation. The statement was used by multiple media organizations and social media companies to downplay and suppress reports before the 2020 presidential election. Further troubling is the fact that the experts group also included a former Justice Department official, Tashina Gahar, who was extensively involved in the FBI's probe into baseless allegations that President Trump colluded with Russia in the 2016 election. For a group that is supposed to be objective and nonpartisan, DHS stacked this group with individuals who have abused their credentials and prior roles within the federal government to seemingly advance partisan or personal agendas. On May 2nd, DHS agreed that the Homeland Security Intelligence Group's expert group would be wound down following litigation that raised serious concerns that members of the group did not demonstrate objectivity. While this was a step in the right direction, DHS later formed a seemingly rebranded Homeland Intelligence Advisory Board to build upon, quote, build upon the experts group. On June 25th, 2024, Republican members of the committee sent a letter to Secretary Mayorkas requesting documents and information regarding this advisory board. And other than a boilerplate letter response, these requests remain to this day outstanding. It's unsurprising that we've been stonewalled by DHS and our requests have gone unanswered, but this is a consistent theme. My common sense legislation simply prohibits the creation of the group or the formation of any group, program, initiative, or any other similar effort that's equivalent to the group within DHS, no matter the administration, that could be used to potentially support political agendas or messaging while being guised as an expert or advisory group. And I'd also add that the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has included a similar provision in the Intelligence Authorization Act that prohibits federal funds from being obligated or expended to support the expert group or any successor group as well. That similar provision was passed out of the committee. It's imperative that DHS works to address the catastrophic border crisis in which over 10 million immigrants have crossed the border illegally, including almost 400 known or suspected terrorists, or INA's shortcomings to live up to the original purpose that DHS was supposed to have for them. You know, as we sit through these briefs, these threat briefs together, and we hear information, and we go into a SCIF, and as a user of intelligence for over 25 years, who struck targets in enemy territory, it is critical that we get nonpartisan, unbiased, non-politicized, factual intelligence. There is no place in any administration for the politicization of intelligence. The American public is putting their trust in us to go into that SCIF and perform the correct duties to analyze the intelligence that we get. This is common sense, and it's actually, our country depends on it. The safety, the security of our country and every single citizen depends on doing just that. We have to stop any sort of effort to politicize. And if we all believe in that, this is going to be an easy bill to support. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Goldman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with my colleague from Texas. There needs to be nonpartisan, apolitical intelligence and expertise that informs all of our executive branch agencies. That's a big part of the reason why Schedule F of Project 2025 is so dangerous, because it would literally remove all nonpartisan experts from the federal government and allow for anyone implementing it to install political lackeys with political viewpoints. The problem with this bill is several-fold. First of all, this group does not exist anymore. So then the question is, why does this bill prohibit it? And that gets to the next point, which it clearly is not intended to prohibit this specific intelligent experts group. It is the grossly generalized language of any similar effort that this bill would also preclude. And I at least appreciate that my colleague from Texas was open about the reason why he is putting forward a bill that would make it more difficult for the Department of Homeland Security to gather expert advice in order to do their jobs. And we've had a lot of testimony in this committee, including from some of these outside groups who work with CISA to ensure that our elections are secure, that the DHS relies very heavily on outside experts. So you want to get to the rub of this, which is that you don't like the letter that 51 former intelligence officials signed in October of 2020, which you misquoted. It did not say that the Hunter Biden laptop or the release of the information about it was Russian disinformation. It said that based on all of their expertise, it had the hallmarks of Russian disinformation. And there are lots of very good reasons for that, that I know you choose to ignore. Let's just dig into it for a minute, because who was the source of, it wasn't a laptop, it was actually a hard drive. Who was the source of the hard drive? The source of the hard drive was Rudy Giuliani. And now we know, after there's been declassified information, that Rudy Giuliani was cavorting with known Russian intelligence agents for over a year leading up to that October surprise. So the notion that an intelligence expert, such as the former director of the CIA or the former director of the Office of National Intelligence, would view a selective release by someone cavorting with Russian assets, Russian intelligence agents, to be a hallmark of Russian intelligence is accurate. It's 100% accurate. You just don't like what it said, and you don't like that neutral, objective intelligence officials would read the cavorting and association of Rudy Giuliani with Russian intelligence agents to be an obvious and objective concern about Russian interference in our election, just like they, of course, did in 2016. And so let's go back to this. The other woman, I'm not familiar with her, but you said something about the Russian investigation.
Will the gentleman yield? 10 seconds.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, it's nice that we can have fun. I mean, I do. It is good to have.
Do you have a yielding for a question, or what's your?
But if I wanted to ask you about the definition of "is," as we go back to the hallmarks of Russian disinformation.
All right, I'll reclaim my time. So,
The gentleman reclaims.
The interesting thing is that the entire intelligence community has definitively assessed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election. Are you now saying, Mr. Pfluger, that anyone who has ever signed on to an intelligence determination or assessment that says that Russia interfered in the 2016 election cannot provide any information or expertise to anyone in the federal government because they show signs of political bias? And I'm happy to yield to you to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that this is a personal issue for you. here.
No, it's not
I
personal
think
to me.
previous-
It's personal
If
to
you're
the United
reclaiming,
States.
if you're reclaiming, reclaim.
No, go ahead.
With previous dealings with this issue. But I think you're also in agreement that we shouldn't have politicized intelligence. I just heard you say that for a couple of minutes.
I am.
So
I'll reclaim my time. The problem is you are parroting misinformation and incorrect information to impugn very dignified and respected former members of the intelligence community who have given their careers to this country to protect our country with intelligence that they carry a tremendous amount of expertise.
So the gentleman's time has expired, and I'm comfortable if someone else wants to yield to him, but as I said at the beginning of the committee today, I'm going to stick to the 5-minute rule because it's a long 21 bill or 20 bill day. So does anyone else wish to comment on the bill? Mr. Carter, you're recognized.
I yield my time, Mr. Goldman.
Mr. Golden, you're recognized.
Oh, thank you. I'll finish up briefly because it's pretty remarkable that this bill is being put forward to prohibit any funding for any outside expertise from former intelligence officials or anyone with expertise to the Department of Homeland Security, which we all know that the department relies heavily upon because of your subjective viewpoint that an assessment that something carries the hallmarks of a Russian intelligence operation is somehow a politicized viewpoint and therefore undermines the credibility of anyone who had signed that letter to be able to give nonpartisan or apolitical intelligence. You are hamstringing the department from trying to receive expert information from those who are public servants and who are experts. And you're basing it on your own political views, not their political views, because you don't like things that they may have said based on their objective experience. And so I just want to note for the record, and I hope this does go into the legislative history, that because this term, similar effort, is so overly vague as to be undefined, that this bill shall not apply to anything other than the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group, and that whatever successor or future group that the Department of Homeland Security would like to convene in order for them to do their jobs better is permitted and should be funded by the Department of Homeland Security, because this is unconstitutionally vague otherwise. And so I want the legislative record to note that this must be interpreted as solely affecting the Homeland Intelligence Experts Group. And I yield back to Mr. Carter. Thank you.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Carter.
I yield.
Gentleman yields.
Chairman.
Does anyone else wish to?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Greene, you're recognized.
Yes, I'd like to enter for the record 2 letters that the committee sent to Secretary Mayorkas about this issue. So I'd like to enter both of these into the record.
So ordered.
Also, I'd like to remind everyone that the Russia hoax started with Christopher Steele writing a dossier. No, I do not yield time to you. Writing a dossier.
You know you're wrong, though.
Writing
Say this over and over.
written-
You know
Mr. Goldman, you
Excuse
do
me.
not have the floor.
Written by Christopher Steele, paid for by Hillary Clinton's campaign and others. This was purely politics to smear Donald Trump in the 2016 election. It was a complete and total lie, propagated by Democrats and the media. Smeared President Trump, leading to the Russia hoax, leading to this lie, and the American people know it. Here's the real issue. People like James Clapper and John Brennan, they should not have their security clearances. They should be revoked and taken away because they no longer work for the government. They go on television and lie about things like the Hunter Biden laptop. They go on television and talk about a letter they've signed with other intelligence community experts lying about the Hunter Biden laptop in order to make the American people believe something that isn't true. They use their title as intelligence community experts, and they use that heavy weight of that title to tell lies to the American people, to persuade people during a presidential election. You want to know where the contents of that laptop came from? Came directly from Hunter Biden, because that was his laptop. And all of the information on that laptop belonged to Hunter Biden. The liars were the 51 intelligence community experts, so-called experts, that signed their name to a lie in order to persuade the American people of such a lie. That's why those people honestly should not have their security clearances anymore. They shouldn't. And, you know, perhaps that's a bill we should consider, Mr. Chairman. I support this bill, and I yield to my friend, Mr. Pfluger.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you to
So,
my
Mr.
colleague.
Pfluger.
And just as a point, that laptop has now been entered as evidence as a federal crime by the Justice Department. So let's just get the facts on the table here.
Will you yield?
No, I won't. But and I think it's also a point, Mr. Chairman, to direct our comments to the chair as a matter of our decorum here in the committee room. But this is important. You know, this is important that we get to the heart of the matter, and every American deserves to hear the truth, the facts. And when we have politicized people who, for the purpose and using their security clearances to politically motivate, suppress, or censor information, then there's questions. And that's what this bill addresses. It addresses that very thing. It gets to the heart of our Homeland Security. There's no room for politicization of intel, period. And that's all it is. It sounds like that you support that. So I look forward to seeing you vote in favor of this. I'll yield back to my friend from Georgia.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentlelady yields. I recognize Mr. I did hear a female
was me.
voice. Mr. Ramirez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague in front of me started with saying we should not be politicizing our time here. But as I'm hearing debate on this particular bill, it is all about politics. I strongly oppose H.R. 5729 because it is a MAGA political stunt that folks would have long-lasting damaging effects on Homeland Security. The bill's language belies what its actual purpose is. You see, the bill, it says that it would defund Homeland Intelligence Experts Group, but as my colleague to my right here said, it no longer exists. But this bill does go far beyond just that. It actually prohibits any federal funding for the establishment of an equivalent group, any program initiative, or any similar effort. And it goes as far as attempting to tie future Congress's hands by prohibiting the authorization of any activities at DHS that are equivalent to activities of the experts group. But see, looking at the legislation, nowhere in the legislation is equivalent group or similar effort defined, nowhere. So this vague, overbroad legislation would prohibit DHS from soliciting and receiving diverse perspectives on Homeland Security intelligence from outside intelligence groups, from civil rights and liberty organizations, from local law enforcement agencies, from state and local governments, from private industry, I can go on. In fact, H.R. 5729 would prevent the very people and the organizations that DHS aims to protect from weighing in on DHS intelligence activities. Mr. Chairman, I don't know about you, but I want DHS to have the ability to actually engage with people and organizations outside the federal government without regard to politics, so that the people and the organizations DHS serves can actually have a voice on what DHS is doing. This bill, it's the opposite. For that reason, I oppose H.R. 5729, and I give the remaining of my time, I yield it back to Mr. Goldman.
Thank you very much, and fully agree with everything you just said. I'm just going to take a quick opportunity to clarify some blatantly false statements from my colleagues, which not only were once again reiterated in this committee room, but have been pervasive and persistent for many years now. First of all, let's talk about evidence, which my colleague from Texas brought up. That is correct. The laptop belonging to Hunter Biden was admitted into evidence in a trial. That is a different piece of technology than the one that was provided to the New York Post. And if you don't believe me, you can ask the former New York Post writer who testified before the Weaponization Subcommittee, who acknowledged that she received a hard drive, not the laptop, a hard drive from Rudy Giuliani. And it doesn't take a computer expert to understand that hard drives can be manipulated. So if your point is to say that because the Hunter Biden laptop was introduced into evidence in a trial, that therefore whatever Rudy Giuliani had was legitimate, you're sorely mistaken and completely wrong. I also would just like to briefly address one thing, because it's impossible to address everything that my colleague from Georgia said. The Russia investigation very clearly started from a tip from an Australian diplomat to the FBI about a conversation that he had with someone who was involved in Donald Trump's campaign. You like to lump in the Christopher Steele dossier as if that had anything to do with the origination of the actual Russia election interference investigation. It did not. It did have to do with subsequent FISA warrants, and that has been the subject of an intelligence committee, but that had absolutely nothing to do with the investigation that led Special Counsel Mueller to conclude that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, the Trump campaign knew it, and the Trump campaign welcomed that interference and used it for its purpose. So the Steele dossier has nothing to do with that investigation. Let's be very clear about that. I yield back.
Mr. Chair.
That's. Thank you, and I just want to set the record straight because there's been some misinformation here. The Hunter Biden laptop, the reason somebody had it was because he failed to pick it up, and there was a copy of the hard drive of the laptop was given to the New York Post. That story was published, and at the time, a senior Biden administration or Biden campaign official by the name of Anthony Blinken, he called an individual by the name of Michael Morrell, who was a former deputy director of the CIA. He asked to help draft a letter that urged the intelligence community to be vigilant about Russian disinformation during the 2020 election. Now, they signed it, and they signed it with saying that this had all the earmarks or hallmarks of hallmarks, really should have said hallmarks, of Russian disinformation. This story about Hunter Biden and his laptop. All the while, they knew that the information was actually true. Because I'm not going to yield, okay? Because they knew they had a copy of of Biden's laptop. The New York Post had already written about it, and it was done 2 days prior to a presidential debate in order to give President Biden cover that he took out and said 51 intelligence officers said that this is misinformation.
Will you yield for a question?
No, I won't.
Just for a question.
No, I'm not. Okay, so don't ask again, okay? That this is misinformation, all right? So the only people that really interfered in our election, because later, when asked, a poll was taken about, hey, had you known that the Hunter Biden laptop information was real, would you have changed your vote? A good number, enough to overturn that election, said they would. So the only people that really interfered in our election were the supposedly, trusted experts of the intelligence community that lied to the American people. Not directly, very, very smart. Like I said, had all the hallmarks of. And that was used by the technology companies like Twitter at the time, Facebook, to subvert and basically destroy that story, which was true all along. And not one thing that the New York Post has ever written about what was in that laptop has ever been disputed as being false. Not one thing. After now we know that we have the Hunter Biden laptop. So good trying to change history, okay? But you know, history has a way of coming back and biting you, just like it's doing right now. Because that's exactly what happened, and that's the truth. And by the way, at the end, I still have some time? Great, okay. At the end, the only party, the only people that actually paid Russians to lie and put false information into the Steele dossier was the Clinton campaign and the DNC, who by the way, tried to wash that payment through a legal firm, and then they were fined by the FEC for doing that to the tune of about $500,000. All right? So the only people trying to really fool the American people, are sitting on that side of the aisle right now. Thank you.
You yield now?
Will the gentleman yield?
I'll yield my remaining time to you.
Thank you. I'd like to enter for the record an article dated March 17th, 2022, 2 years after the 2020 election, where 51 intelligence community so-called experts lied to the American people, saying the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't real. The New York Times belatedly admits the emails on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop are real and newsworthy. That would have been great information for the American people in the election of 2020. Mr. Chair, I'd also like to introduce for the record another article dated March 30th, 2022, after 51 intelligence community experts lied to the American people in 2020. This one is titled, Washington Post Joins New York Times in Finally Admitting Emails from Hunter Biden Laptop Are Real. I'd like to enter those for the record, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objection, both will be entered into the record. Would like to remind all members to please direct their comments to the chair and not to other members here. I will be happy to receive those comments. Do any other members wish to speak? Ms. Clark, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
Thank you to my colleague from my next door neighbor in New York. I'm not going to belabor this. It's been belabored for 8 years. I will point out one fundamental flaw in my friend from Florida's recitation of what transpired. These were 51 former officials who did not have access to the FBI's evidence files and could not have had any. Do you need to, can you just listen? And who could not have had access and so would not have known whether or not there was a real laptop or whether it was compared. And that's why the fact is that when they said these are hallmarks of Russian intelligence operation, they were speaking based on their expertise of being longtime public servants, intelligence officials who have dealt directly with Russian intelligence and their efforts not only to interfere in the 2016 election, but going back decades. So I know my colleagues like to throw around the idea that they lied. They had no information to the contrary because only the FBI had the laptop in its custody and nobody else had the laptop. And as many people acknowledge, I'm sure even my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would acknowledge, hard drives can be tampered with. So the fact that there was information on the laptop does not mean that that information remains untampered on a hard drive. So let's just get this straight, because ultimately what this bill is about is a retributive effort by the Republicans to punish intelligence experts who don't share their view of politics and policy, but who used their expert judgment in an objective way with the necessary and proper qualifiers, and in no way, shape, or form lied under any definition of that word, except for the completely perverse definition that I guess my colleague from Georgia seems to have. But let's call a spade here, because you are essentially trying to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security does not have access to expert information in order to keep our homeland safe. And you're doing that because of a misunderstanding and misrepresentation about what you would like to have as revisionist history, that some of those experts actually, opinions that those experts actually made. And it is truly a shame that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are falling prey to this really ugly and political discourse that is having a dramatic and would have a dramatic impact on the Department of Homeland Security actually keeping our homeland safe. Ms. Clark, I'll yield back unless...
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's interesting that my colleague from New York, Mr. Goldman, just argued that they had no evidence to the contrary because the FBI had the laptop. If they had no evidence, Mr. Chairman, then why did they feel it necessary to release this letter without having all the evidence? Normally, that's pretty common when you're investigating something. And I think Mr. Jimenez, my colleague from Florida, pointed out exactly why they did it, because they were scared to death that this evidence that had been released, regardless of who it was from, was true. And if it was true and the American people found out about Hunter Biden and everything that he was up to, would have voted differently. And polls showed that post-election. All right.
You voted differently for Hunter Biden?
Sir, I haven't yielded my time. Thank you. If you could respect that, I respected while you were talking. My colleague talks about the fact that he doesn't like, my colleague from New York talks about the fact that he doesn't like, or that we don't like, that this information came from Rudy Giuliani. But what he's not telling you is what he doesn't like is that now, after we're close to 4 years removed from this, everybody knows that the Hunter Biden laptop is in fact true. He can make every argument in the world, but we all know it's true. And here's the thing. When I hear some of my colleagues, Mr. Chairman, talk about, oh, we don't want Homeland Security working with experts or outside sources, this bill is not going to stop that. Law enforcement and DHS will continue to use experts and outside sources. What this bill does is stop DHS and the American people from funding an experts group. So I want to make that really clear. We're going to continue to use experts. Law enforcement will continue to use experts, sources, people who are giving them information. It's not going to stop that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Any other member wish to be recognized?
Mr. Chairman.
Ranking member is recognized.
I actually would like to get back to the bill. The Hunter Biden thing kind of distracts from what I think is the original intent. In reading this legislation, I want to figure out the purpose. The purpose is, as Mr. Greene referenced, it talks about specific information advisory committee, expert committees. I'm convinced that when you prohibit an agency from having that kind of access to information, you make us vulnerable. And I would hope the gentleman in making this bill will want to keep us safe. I think any secretary should have access to all the experts available on any given subject. And I would encourage this committee to prohibit that makes us vulnerable as a country, but also it limits whoever the secretary is from doing his or her job. My understanding is that the Homeland Intelligence Advisory Board is basically a forum for DHS to get input from a variety of communities, including intelligence experts, Homeland Security experts, private and civil liberties folk, and all this. I don't see us saying you don't need to talk to these kind of people because their mission is to keep us safe from foreign and domestic challenges. And I don't know how you can do it without talking to people. So I'm inclined to think that we want the federal government to hear all the diverse views possible and then make a rational decision on the information collected. So from my perspective, I'll be voting no on the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the assertion that there's somehow a personal motivation to make our country less secure is ludicrous. Like, that's absolutely ludicrous. And I know some in this room are new to intelligence and going into the SCIF and receiving these briefs. But we're not talking about diverse views, we're talking about facts. That's all that matters, are the facts. I'd actually like to work, my colleague from New York mentioned that the 51 folks that signed this letter had no access to the FBI files prior to signing this letter. That they had no access to the facts is what I heard him say, that they could not have known, and I quote, they could not have known. I think that's exactly the reason that we're concerned. Because they could not have known. And actually, I would like to work with my colleague from New York on something. If we're so sure that this group of experts was right, why don't we ask them to come take a polygraph on their letter? And let's just set the record straight for once and all. Let's ask them to take a polygraph about that letter, because that is actually a requirement when you have access to classified information. You submit yourself willingly with a non-disclosure agreement that says you won't talk about classified information, and that you submit yourself willingly to a polygraph. Anybody who's had access to classified information in any other agency in this federal government has signed that letter. I've signed it. Everybody else has signed it. Let's ask that group of 51 people, will you work with me on that? Will you ask them to come take a polygraph on this issue? I yield.
Will the
Thank you. Would
gentleman
you yield?
yield?
Thank you. Just to follow up on that.
I just wanted to, will you work with me to ask them to do a polygraph?
You know they've all testified under oath to
That's not the question I'm asking.
Judiciary Committee.
That's not the question.
Mr. Chairman, I
Okay.
reclaim my
Point of
time.
order, claim, the gentleman from Texas has
Pull this thing
reclaimed his
back
time.
on, just pull this thing back on the rails. Mr. Pfluger, are you done?
Would the gentleman yield?
The gentleman from Texas controls the time.
Mr. Goldman, I'll yield to you, and then I'll reclaim it. So use it wisely, please.
Gentleman, you're recognized.
Thank you. I just want to be very clear. They made an expert assessment based on their training and experience and the facts that they knew. They did not say this information is false. They said it had the hallmarks of Russian disinformation campaign. So I don't know, I'm happy for them to come into polygraph. I don't really care. I'm sure they would say the same thing, which is not that they said, we are right, we are wrong. It was flagging an issue in the election after Russia had done the exact same thing.
Mr. Chairman.
And I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Ms. Greene?
Thank you. I'd like to tell the committee there's important information to know about this advisory board, DHS advisory board. Members on the advisory board are highly political. Frances Taylor, a former Obama administration, made at least 650 political contributions, totaling over $32,000, all to the Democrat Party or Democrat candidates for office. Asha George, Rajesh Day, Karen Wagner, Elisa Massimo, they also made a combined total of 179 political contributions totaling $60,000 exclusively to Democrat candidates for political office. I definitely support this bill. No federal funds should establish a Homeland Intelligence Expert Group filled with people that are highly political. So much so, they're not just political in their voting record, which is private. They're political with their funds. And they do it openly by supporting the Democrat Party and Democrat candidates. I don't think this is good. We've seen it with the intelligence community signing their name to a lie, and they knew it was a lie. 51 intelligence officials lied about the Hunter Biden laptop, and we saw the Democrats lie about the Russia hoax. Thank you. I yield back.
Yield back to the gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
Latrell, will you yield for 5 seconds to me? 10 seconds, whatever you have left.
Yes, sir, Mr. Jimenez.
Thank you. The point is that the origin of that letter is purely political. It came from the Biden campaign. Mr. Blinken was working for the Biden campaign, and he asked a senior intelligence official to help him draft it and have people sign it. And since they didn't know if it was true or not, they should have never signed it because they didn't know if it was true or not. That came out of your own mouth, all right? So it was purely political act, and that's what we're trying to stop right now. Thank you.
We're actually trying to stop interference in our elections. That's what we're trying to stop.
Come on, hey, Dan.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Gentleman is recognized.
I just want to join the ranking member in sort of getting back to the text of this bill. This would be a complete ban on funding any type of advisory group. And so, Mr. Pfluger, do you believe that it's important for executive level officials to be able to engage and get the insights of state and local governments and private industry? And so I would yield to you because I think that's critically important.
No, thank you for that.
If you think that's valuable.
No, I think it's very important to have the facts discussed. It's very important. This bill prohibits the funding, and this is the difference. It's very important, and I never walked into an intelligence brief where we had an outside group that was telling us about the threat we were going to face that wasn't particularly vetted by the experts.
I just want to because you sort of keep making that distinction when we go down this SCIF, and that's a particular classified setting for this, right? And this is the ability of DHS to engage with external stakeholders in a variety of different conversations, and how you sort of have framed this bill about the predecessor and then any future, right, advisory group means that it's really going to tie the hands of this DHS, the next DHS, and any DHS moving forward. And to me, why would we do that, to the ranking member's point, when we seem to all be in agreement that it's really helpful to get these external parties? And if you think it's important, then you need to be able to appropriate money, and any money appropriated to DHS to be used in furtherance of an advisory group that seeks these opinions.
Will you yield for a second?
I yield.
Yeah, I'd like to work with you in future Congresses on our oversight.
Yeah.
And if you'd allow me to enter this into the record.
Only if it's good stuff.
It's good stuff. This is the HPSI bill that basically says that it's the same language. Yeah. Mr. Chairman?
Without objection.
I'd like to work with you because I think our job is oversight regardless of political party. That's what this bill is about, is let's hit the reset button. In our opinion, and you may disagree, I agree with Mr. Jimenez. This was a political maneuver. We want to hit the reset button to get back to intelligence. We're not okay with this. My constituents aren't okay with it. We want to hit the reset button so we have good, factual intelligence that keeps our country safe.
And I think the oversight function is exactly what you're trying to get at, right? And totally understand, and you can have your viewpoint, which may differ from Mr. Goldman's, from other colleagues, et cetera. That's entirely fine. But this bill goes so far beyond what you're trying to achieve when we all seem to be in agreement that connecting the federal executive branches with outside voices is critically important. If we think it's important, then we need to be able to fund it. And so I think, I understand you may be frustrated, I understand you may be upset with what happened, but to say and tie DHS's hands when they have such a critically important mission, why this committee is so important, and they will not have the ability, and if they use any money appropriated to them to anything that looks like that, we're gonna have a problem. And so I I think we can better achieve what you're looking for, not by this bill, but by other pursuits. I yield to.
Mr. Mendes, would you yield?
It's trust.
Yeah.
We don't trust. My constituents don't trust. They're demanding a reset. They just don't trust. This bill hits the reset button to get the trust back, to restore trust.
And we can go back and forth. I know the lies and liars has been used a lot. It's not for me. But that's also what political elections are for if people don't have trust, right? And we're supposed to legislate and uplift and the work that our professionals do at DHS, no matter what the administration is, right? And we have oversight of it, and we're supposed to exercise that oversight function, right? But if there's a lack of trust, I believe that belongs to the American voters to elect a new president. That being said, if we are going to use lies and liars and accuse people across the aisle back and forth, be very careful. Be very careful, because Mr. Jimenez says history comes back to bite you. Do you think the former president has been truthful with the American people from the time that he ran in 2016 to date? Because if you don't, then be very careful of who you accuse to be a liar. And I would just leave it there. I yield to Dan Goldman.
I want to flag one thing on that, just to follow on what Mr. Menendez said, that I think is very important. And I think that this notion that, oh, my constituents tell me this, the constituents tell you things that you have fomented. And they react to the partisanship that they are hearing. And I think we all need to be very, very careful, whether we're talking about the First Amendment or otherwise, of determining that someone has political bias that they cannot leave at the door, and that they are incapable of ever being nonpartisan if they have given a donation to a political candidate. That is going to nullify a lot of expert people from any nonpartisan job, and I think we need to be very careful about that. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman's time has expired. Do any other members wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The chair recognizes the member from the great state of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points. First, let's not mistake the fact that foreign actors, including Russia, have tried and are continuing to try to influence our elections. It's not a conspiracy, it's not a hoax, it is real. It is the opinion of the intelligence community, the Department of Justice. In fact, just recently, the Department of Justice has put out arrest warrants against both U.S. and Russian individuals for attempting to influence our elections. And we do a grave disservice to the people we represent if we try to deny it or downplay it just because we think that those foreign actors might help our preferred candidate. But separate and apart from all of that, I want to again reinforce what Ranking Member Thompson said, which is that even if you disagree or even if you're okay with foreign actors trying to influence American elections or sow division or turn Americans against each other, the language of this bill is very broad. It would ban funding for any Homeland Intelligence Experts Group and doesn't even really define what a Homeland Intelligence Experts Group is. So is it to be read as you can't convene a group of industry experts to advise the Department of Homeland Security on any intelligence matter? We talk a lot in this committee about the importance of getting ahead of artificial intelligence, about the importance of getting ahead of quantum computing and other methods of modernizing DHS. Certainly, we will need advice from the private sector on how to do that. Certainly, we should be working collaboratively with the private sector to make the homeland more secure. And to suggest that we shouldn't do it because some of the individuals in an advisory group might have political opinions that match those of their administration, well, geez. I mean, I would guess that most people on advisory committees in a Republican administration are Republicans. Hopefully not all. Hopefully you want a diversity of opinions, but I would guess that most of them would be Republicans. And in a Democratic administration, I would guess that many of them would be Democrats. That's why we have elections. So listen, there's a lot to unpack here, but at the very least, as Ranking Member Thompson has suggested and others have echoed, the language in this bill as it is written appears to be so broad and the definitions are so vague that it could be read as to ban all kinds of interactions with experts that may help make our homeland more secure. So without belaboring it, I would encourage my friend, the sponsor, and others to maybe go back to the drawing board, refine this, be more specific about it, because the language is very broad as I read it, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Do any other members wish to be recognized to speak on the bill? Seeing none, are there any amendments to the amendments in the nature of a substitute? Hearing none, the question is now on agreeing to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Pfluger. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying no. In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is agreed to. The question now occurs on reporting the bill, H.R. 5729, as amended to the House with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. All opposed, please signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to.
Mr. Chair,
The ranking member is recognized.
ask for a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Committee Rule 7C. Further proceedings on this question are postponed. Chair now moves to H.R. 9.